are in the book Welcoming the Stranger. If you're visiting with us, we're kind of in the middle of looking at the immigration situation here in the United States and some comparing it to what the Bible says about how we treat people and see how that fits with our beliefs. So we are at page 7 in the book. I want to kind of set this up a little bit. This particular section is entitled Learning Through Relationships. And I mentioned this briefly last time, but what is the point about relationships? What do relationships allow us to do? I know that's kind of vague.
Get to know one another.
Absolutely. Okay, I think you're hitting about what I'm trying to bring out here. As we try to understand someone's situation, or as we try to understand God's Son Jesus, it's important to have that relationship so that you have a better understanding of what that person or that deity was trying to teach, was trying to accomplish, was trying to why they're in the situation they're in. And so in that regard, let's start reading on page 7 here, Learning Through Relationships. And by the way, both authors believe that developing relationships are easier once you hear some of the stories and perspectives can change. So that's why we're doing all this. All right. More than just a policy question, immigration is also personal to each of us. And when they say each of us, they're talking about the authors. Because of many immigrants we have come to know, these relationships have transformed our own perspectives. Each immigrant and each non-immigrant affected by immigration has a distinct story that cannot be summarized by abstract statistics or polling data. I, Matthew, have been particularly marked by getting to know some of my neighbors. First in the diverse apartment complex with neighbors from more than 20 nations, now in a neighborhood where most households are of Mexican origin. My first friend in the apartment complex where I lived for many years is, I'll call Gene. He is now in college in a suburb of Chicago, but he was born in Rwanda shortly before genocide broke out in that small East African country in 1994. He fled with his family to Tanzania, then to the Congo, and then finally to Zambia, where he lived for nearly a decade. In 2005, Gene and his family were accepted by the U.S. government as refugees to be resettled in the United States. With the help of churches, volunteers, and the Rwandese community already in the United States and World Relief, they have made a new life for themselves step by step. When I met them, Gene's mother and father were working hard in difficult, low-paying jobs at all hours of the day and night to pay the bills and even to pay the U.S. government back for their 7 transatlantic airline tickets. Gene was less concerned with his family's finances than about fitting in at his school, mastering American English, which was his 5th language, which he was concerned he spoke with an accent, and finding a lawn mowing job for the summer. He was tired of sharing a bedroom with his 4 sisters and often mentioned that he missed what he missed of Africa, but he was thankful to be safe. Another neighbor, Alina, had a very different story. She came to the United States from Mexico in 1990 at the age of 26, crossing the border illegally with the expensive assistance of a coyote, who is a people smuggler. Hoping to find a job that would let her make ends meet, something she could not find in Mexico, she has now lived and worked here for more than a quarter century. She's involved in her church, which is a Catholic parish that has nearly as many people in its Spanish language masses each weekend as in its English masses. She's married and divorced in the United States and raised 2 children on a limited income. She speaks enough English to work the drive-through at the fast food restaurant across the street, but she's not fluent and often came by to ask for help reading a letter in English from her children's school. She often has brought delicious enchiladas or chilaquiles. I gained 40 pounds as her neighbor for 8 years, for which I think she is partially responsible. Alina is very proud that her children speak English, but sometimes laments their reluctance to speak Spanish. She prays for a legalization of some sort, or that her U.S.-born children will eventually be able to help her get a green card. She notes the small amount of assistance that the African refugees, like Jean's family, receive from the government, for which she is ineligible. Even though she too struggles to support her family, still she is happy to be here. I live better here than in Mexico, she told me shortly after I met her. Here nothing lacks, which is an astonishing statement given that she sometimes fell behind on her rent payments for the modest one-bedroom apartment that she shared with 3 others in her family. She could not afford a car and had no health insurance. I have work. In Mexico, there is no work. 2 doors down from Alina lived an African-American family who moved from a rough neighborhood on the west side of Chicago, seeking to avoid the gang violence there. The mother, Serena, worked at a fast food restaurant while preparing to take the GED high school equivalency exam. She got along fine with her neighbors. She even gave Alina's daughter a ride to school on rainy days. But she told me she did not think it was right that the Mexican immigrants come illegally and take jobs while her husband was out of work. She too notices the help that the African refugees receive from churches and wonders why something like that is not available for someone who was born in this country. Living in relationships with immigrants, refugees, and other low-income people has forced us to grapple with the question of what it means for us as followers of Christ to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It has also awakened us to an ethically complex question of immigration and refugee policy. Who do we let in? What do we do with those who came in, even though our government did not allow them in? And whatever will our policies have on those already here and struggling to get by? Of course, our attempts to address these questions have been shaped by our own personal journeys. I apologize for reading that to you, but not everybody has a book. So, what do you get out of this? Anything?
Well, for me, it reminds me of something that I thought about that happened right here in our own, not too far from us. Our Chinese restaurants closed because of illegal immigrants, and I was terribly upset about that. But not about the people that were affected with that, but the fact that I wouldn't have this good restaurant to go to when I got hungry for Chinese food. And now the first time I read this made me think about how I should have felt about that, because some of those people that were affected may have not even been illegal.
Yeah.
But they were still people.
Yeah.
That was what bothered me about it, was because that good restaurant wouldn't be there anymore.
Yeah.
And that wasn't right.
Yeah. Well, the things I got out of this were that these are people from different walks of life, different situations, all kind of thrust into a melting pot, as the United States used to be known as, and struggling to get by, okay, as many people do.
This is probably, we're all immigrants,
Yes, we are.
or from families that are immigrants, unless we're Indians.
That's right.
But thing of it is, whenever our ancestors came here, they probably faced some of the same types of things as far as struggling to make ends meet, to buy the food, to try to find work, and the whole bit. And sometimes we forget about that part of it.
Yep.
That our families, and a lot of us, because our families did struggle and stay and became citizens of the United States, they did us a favor in that we are American citizens by birth.
Yeah. What else? Anything?
thought about the first immigrants too, and the fact that illness, they wouldn't get to stay. Perhaps one member out of a whole family would have to be sent back. And I wondered, what if there wasn't any family back there for them to go back to?
Yeah.
So they had problems also, and serious things to deal with.
Well, one of the things I like about this book was kind of at the tail end of where we were reading. And it's easy to find books that tend to side one way or the other. You can find books that tend to side with the immigrants. You can find books that tend to side with the Americans, okay? But throughout this book, I felt like the authors have attempted, at least, to show the bigger picture. So, for example, I mean, it says on verse 9, are forced us to grapple with the question of what it means for us as followers of Christ to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We've talked about that already. And has also awakened us to the complex questions of immigration. Who do we let in? What do we do with those that come here? You know, how do you sustain them? And that's kind of what the government is up against now. The number of refugees coming in is so large, it's difficult to sustain them while they're waiting their turn to be evaluated as whether they're not a refugee. So that's kind of my thought here. Let's look at Matthew 22. Matthew 22, verses 36 through 40. It says, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" Of course, they're asking Jesus, right? And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets." How does a commandment to love have anything to do with the commandments and the law? When I'm talking about the religious law, the Old Testament law, the law of Moses, whatever you want to call it.
First, we're to love God, and then we're to love His children.
All right? To me, it's kind of a stair-step thing, okay? What the old law said to do was, you're to love your God.
We're to love God.
Okay? That's right up there in the commandments, okay? And then, second of all, as you love God, you have to love His creations. We're His creations. We're created in His image. So we have to love His creations. And so he says in the tail end of this that we read here, and you're to love your neighbors as yourself. We generally don't have any trouble loving ourselves, do we? I mean, I buy clothes to cover this ugly body. You know, I love myself. I love the fact that I can do that, okay? But when we love our neighbors as ourselves, then we have to kind of get past some of these stereotypes that are being thrown around out there. And so I think that's why this passage in Matthew, it makes it hard for Christians to see what's going on and not be troubled. Okay? At least it is for me. Any thoughts? All right, well, let's go on then. Still reading on page 9. Talk about Matthew's story. Matthew is one of the two authors, co-authors of this book. Okay? As we kind of read through this passage here, I'm going to read pages 9 through 11. Look for ways that maybe Matthew's story sounds similar to ours. I don't know about you, but I didn't have a whole lot of trouble with that. Matthew's story. I grew up in an evangelical home with parents who were and are committed to their faith in Jesus Christ. That sounds similar, doesn't it? We attended a non-denominational evangelical church where politics were seldom, if ever, mentioned. I suspect, though, that a survey would have shown that a large majority of my congregation, including my family and me, identified with a generally conservative political stance, particularly on issues such as abortion or religious liberty, and also probably on issues of immigration policy. I had little exposure to immigrants growing up in a small city in Niwa, Wisconsin. While Hmong people from Laos had been resettled in neighboring towns, I never interacted with them. There were a few Mexican and Asian immigrants in my town, but almost everybody in my elementary school was descended from white immigrants from Europe, and at least 2 or 3 generations back, if not more. My own ancestors came from Holland in the mid-1800s, long enough ago that the immigrant experience felt removed from my reality. What I knew about immigrants and immigration, I knew primarily from television. As I relocated to the Chicago area for college, I realized that refugees and other immigrants were all around me. Yet I still did not know them. Ironically, I began to think a lot more about U.S. immigration while outside the United States. I spent a summer living and volunteering in San Jose, Costa Rica. There I played sports, tutored, and led Bible studies in a community of immigrants from Nicaragua. Much like Mexicans and Central Americans who go north to find a better economic situation in the United States, hundreds of thousands of Nicaraguans have gone south, both legally and illegally, to take advantage of a more vibrant economy in Costa Rica. And like immigrants in the United States, Nicaraguans in Costa Rica are not always warmly welcomed. In fact, most Costa Ricans would never set foot in the neighborhood where I was volunteering because of its reputation for poverty and violence. I was startled to hear the crude ways in which some Costa Ricans, even committed Christians, scapegoated the hardworking Nicaraguan immigrants, many who had become my friends, for all the country's ills. And then God convicted me that I'd harbored similar attitudes toward immigrants in the United States that I'd never bothered to know personally. I returned to Central America a few years later, where I worked with a local organization affiliated with World Relief. It was called Pueblo, I can't even pronounce it, Pueblos de Acción Comunitaria. I think it means houses for community action. As they sought to help farmers in rural Nicaragua raise their incomes by providing small loans. In my time there, I saw firsthand the extreme poverty and chronic unemployment that motivate many people to immigrate, particularly when lured by promises and rumors, true or untrue, of generous salaries, unparalleled opportunity in the United States. Many of the people I met hoped one day to find a better life in another country for their families, even if that meant going mojado, literally wet, as having crossed the Rio Grande River illegally. Seeing the condition in which many Nicaraguans live, for some, on less than $1 a day, I could hardly blame them for entertaining this option. When I returned to the United States, I accepted a job at World Relief's office in the suburbs of Chicago, where I was able to use my Spanish language skills to partner with churches to assist immigrants in integrating into our society. In the process, I've gotten to know many immigrants, heard their stories, and began to understand why they left their home countries for the United States. My specific job description as an immigration legal counselor allowed me to learn a great deal about our country's immigration laws, exposing my own previous ignorance. Much of what I believed about immigration was inaccurate. On graduation from college, I also decided to move into the diverse apartment complex where Jean, Elena, and Serena lived. My move was based, at least in part, on a desire to understand who my new neighbors were, to try to love them as myself, though I have not always done this well, and to share with them the grace and love I experienced in Christ. Within that apartment complex located in a well-to-do suburb of Chicago, I had neighbors born in Mexico, Sudan, Somalia, Rwanda, Brunei, Sierra Leone, Burma, Vietnam, and India, among other countries, as well as some Caucasians like myself and African Americans whose ancestors came to this country decades or centuries ago. Being a part of this community allowed me to put a human face on the immigration dilemma and has led me deeper into questions of how I ought to think about and act on the immigration problem. I'm going to skip the next paragraph because it's kind of a political statement. Since the publication of the first edition of this book, my role with World Relief has shifted as well. Most of my job is now focused on engaging local churches whose leaders are wrestling with the biblical, legal, and political complexities of immigration. While there is fear in many immigrant congregations, I also frequently encountered among native-born Christians, some of whom are concerned that a growing immigrant population could harm their economic prospects, endanger their safety, or simply change the culture around them to such a point that they no longer recognize it. Those fears on all sides have been heightened after a political season in which immigration has played a more central role than ever in my lifetime. My challenge is to help those diverse groups of Christ followers understand the other's perspective and recognize the opportunity that immigration presents for the church in the United States if we respond out of biblically informed convictions rather than fear. Any Matthew's story hit close to your story?
I just feel that everyone in here probably has a diverse opinion about immigration. And I don't think those opinions are either right or wrong. It's their opinion, and, as long as they don't try to make me believe it, that's okay, Educate me, yes, but force your opinion on me, no. But I would also believe that every Christian in this building would never, ever mistreat an alien, illegal or... I just believe that I have that much faith in my Christian brethren, and I don't think they would mistreat them.
I accept what you're saying, but let me just throw this back at you. When we allow things to happen in a democracy, aren't we condoning some of what happens in that democracy?
You say when we allow something to happen?
How
I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I've got a whole lot of control about what.
Yeah, that's what I do.
You vote, don't you?
I vote.
I do.
You write letters, don't you?
Yep, but I'll tell you what.
You manage this congregation, don't you? I hope so. All I'm saying is that, yes, we are a small cog in a big wheel. But the policies that are enforced in this country are enforced because the administration believes it is the will of the people. So, if it is your opinion, your will, that we do not mistreat other people, regardless of where they're from, are they being mistreated?
I think sometimes our higher-ups, like the senators and governors and that, if they're supposed to listen to us and do what we want them to do, but I don't think they do that a lot of times. I think they do what they want to do, and just for this right here, just for the money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. An illegal immigrant more than likely isn't paying to contribute to a political campaign.
And Dick said, we might vote, might write letters, but it don't do no good according to them.
Well, it is a slow democracy is a slow process, but the way to influence opinion is letting your elected officials know how you feel.
I think one big problem with our country is both parties are afraid they're going to agree and do something that might help everybody. They don't want to agree with the other party because they want to be the top dog, and that's not what they're in that office for.
You bring up a good point, and at the risk of getting too far astray from this book, I would never do that, right? Democracy is not a win-lose situation, okay? And that is how our politics have become. In order for me to win, you have to lose, okay? For most of our history in the United States, democracy has been a compromise. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got enough that I'm okay. This side over here didn't get everything they wanted, but they got enough they're okay. We've lost sight of that. Those compromises don't get people elected anymore. Moderates are a dying breed in Congress. Those that are willing to cross political lines don't last very long. And it is becoming a game of win-lose rather than compromise. Melvin.
I'd like to shed a little light on something I said last week. Whenever I said that no one has the power over you unless you give them that power. In Romans chapter 13, the first verse says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. And so what I mean by no one has the power over you unless you give them that power. We have two elders sitting right there, and I'm sitting right here. They're sitting in the elder seat. They are in a position of power that I have to do something to bring dishonor upon them or the congregation that they are an elder of in order to give them the power over me. And so in this study of this book, and we talk about the administration, I didn't vote for Barack Obama, and I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but this says that God appointed them in that respective position. And if I do anything to dishonor their authority, then I give those same administration power over me. But as long as I mind my own business and let them do what God designed for them to do, I'm confident that God will do a real good job without my help.
I agree up to a certain point. I would venture to say you're under the elder's authority whether you dishonor them or not. But regardless, getting back to Janice's question or comment, it is a situation that is going on around us, and it is going on around us because the powers to be have deemed it to be in the people's will that these policies be enacted. All I'm trying to show is that some of these policies are not in the best interest of the Bible, of Christianity. And therefore, if you see something that is not in agreement with Christianity, then it behooves us to let elected officials know your feelings about that. I'm not trying to start an uprising, not trying to start a letter-writing campaign, I'm not trying to sow discontent. I'm just sharing some things that are going on that we are taking, we're allowing to happen. Any other thoughts?
I haven't been here that much for this study, but I'm under the opinion that if an alien comes into the United States, legally, okay, that they have rights, they're brought into the country and accepted. But the illegal one is the one that I would be concerned with, that are coming in, I don't know, for various different reasons. You know, I think that there's a law, there should be law and order, and if there's laws on the book that says they should not come in illegally, I agree they should not come in illegally.
I can't argue with that. That's true. That's all true.
But to get back also, I've heard comments about we are aliens to this country. We're talking about since generations back, okay?
How far back?
Yeah, whenever I don't know, the laws and everything were different than what they are now.
I only have to go back 3 generations, and I can point to a nation's person that came across from Europe, okay, and tried to settle in the United States, and entered into a relationship of indentured servant until he could earn enough money to buy some property. Okay.
Did they come legally or illegally?
We're going to talk about that. At that point in time, there was no constraint. Anybody that could book passage on a ship could come into the United States and set up a household.
You might say that we are immigrants, but we're not illegal immigrants.
Well, let's hold that thought until we get to the chapters that talk about what makes an immigrant undocumented and how serious a crime it is. Okay.
It's been very interesting today to hear other stories and different immigration stories here. But to me, the saddest story I heard were the people that were here already, the American family, and they couldn't get assistance from our government. But the other 2 families were getting some, maybe not much, but they were getting some. And if you had anybody in here, if there were 3 children here, and one of them was your child, and there were 2 other children, but your children was not being served or getting what they really needed, wouldn't it be difficult for you to go to the other 2 first and not take care of your own children?
Certainly, absolutely.
And that's the saddest thing that I've seen today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. What about the part about not realizing immigrants are around you? I mean, I grew up in southern Michigan, okay? And my grandfather had a grocery store on a major highway, and he would get people who would stop along the highway for beer, cigarettes, convenience items, stuff like that. And I used to work with him, restocking shelves and stuff like that. And I can tell you the number of blacks, immigrants, whatever you want to say, that passed through that door. You could almost count them on both hands. You know, there just were not that many. And so immigration meant nothing to me when I was growing up. It meant nothing to me in school. There were no minorities in my school. And it sounds like that was Matthew's story when he was going through this too. So I don't know about most of you, but we just didn't have much contact with anybody that didn't look like us. So I'm going to stop there. We're going to talk about Jenny's story, which starts on page 11. If you have a book and you want to read ahead, that'd be fine. Thank you for your comments. And it's time to go.